Hello and welcome to Advances in Visualization and Experimentation in Cinematic TV Ads and Games. And we discovered at lunch you could reverse that and get games, ads, TV, cinematic and experimentation and visualization in advances. And it makes the same amount of sense. I'm a creature of David Traub, a replacement for him. He's sitting in Lithuania, actually, with his wife and child and having a wonderful family reunion. I think that there are, from my perspective, this topic is impossible to fathom. So it seemed to me that there are three paradoxes. I used to be in the philosophy business, and paradoxes are very important to us. I think there are three paradoxes going on at the same time. One is the macroeconomic paradox, which is, on one side, we have China backing out of the entertainment industry, the US entertainment industry as fast as it can. Second, we have sort of bipolar investing, where you have investors putting in small money in technology or really large money in technology, but there's very little in the programming end of the world in which I am. We have the same sort of dichotomy in technology. We have big stuff, big VR, now we have small VR, so VR and room-sized VR that we can now develop. And I think that the connection between losing a sense of size and losing a sense of scale, I think, makes a difference for us, because those of us who have millennial children, and we used to go to the movies, our millennial children do not go to the movies. They do not have the same sense of scale. Large is not important to them. Small, mobile, accurate is important to them. And finally, I think social media is yet another paradox, because on one side it connects us to our viewers, to our citizens, to our buyers, and on the other hand it distances us from them in exactly the same way. So I think our problem with VR, or the issue with VR, is how do we do something in a scale that makes a difference, large enough to be exciting and interesting, but small enough to feel intimate? And how do we do the same thing with the internet? And as program producers, as a creative producer, I need to produce stuff that matters to my audience again. And it seems to me they're voting with their little feet, and we must not be doing it right. Anyway, with that introduction, just to be cynical, go ahead, introduce yourself.
I am Matt Newman. I have a company called Digital Wilderness, and for the last 7 years we have been working to eliminate software engineering from software engineering. We have an artificial intelligence that's capable of producing software in any language, and we've recently extended it to be capable of doing augmented reality, which is our first kind of move into the three-dimensional space. We're still working out some bugs, and we're very close to our first version release of the software. Effectively, I saw a large-scale problem that I believe ultimately will be a very large economic problem, being that you have unqualified people producing unqualified code for very qualified purposes. The latest example is Equifax. You have one of the companies that has some of the most secure data about people's information, whether it be addresses to social security numbers, their credit ratings, everything that we rely on as individuals in our world has now been compromised. And that compromise came from unqualified people doing what should be a very qualified job. And so at the inception of my company, it was designed to identify all the factors that were necessary to solve to create this type of solution. So when we set out, we created a credentialing, authentication, logging, and tracking system. We created a visual raster system that was capable of handling all of our raster graphics and video compression algorithms. And then we also set out to create a tool that was capable of anybody using it that could create software, and then we leverage our other technologies and create very qualified, very secure applications for different purposes.
Cool. Terrific. So I'm Philip Plow. I have a company called Persistence Productions. Amongst other things, we work in augmented and virtual reality. And we've produced an experience over the last year called In His Presence, which is a prayer and meditation tool that lets people spend time in VR with a volumetric representation of Jesus. So outside of that, I also work with photogrammatists and volumetric video folks out of Australia and New Zealand, and generally chase whatever tools will let me tell the best stories or create the most beneficial user experiences that we can. So right now we're focused on driving desktop apps to the mobile market and trying to overcome what may be one of the chief barriers to entry, which is the adoption of hardware in VR.
My name's Tom Polson. I have a company called 3D Paint and Effects. We're one of the premier stereoscopic VR post-production companies. We've been doing it about 3.5 years. We're moving now into full production as well as animation, and working with our clients right now to try to solve the 6 degrees of freedom issues with live video. Depth capture being one solution, and we're developing a new solution that actually lets us do it with multiple people on a stage simultaneously. And so, we're trying to continue to develop techniques and ways for creating really compelling experiences for VR. I think that's what's going to ultimately be needed for the success of the whole medium. Otherwise, we'll just have a bunch of hardware.
I'm Kevin Mack. I'm an artist. I am the creator of ShapeSpace, virtual reality art experiences, including Zen Parade and Blortasia. They're art experiences that are designed to inspire awe and to induce the flow state and to activate the parasympathetic nervous system, and in general to produce a transcendent experience. And so I'm doing that, and I'm just trying to keep it together.
I'm Brett Leonard. I've been trying to keep it together in VR for over 25 years, since I made a movie called The Lawnmower Man, which this year is its 25th anniversary. I thought it was going to happen a lot faster, but now I'm involved with 2 different companies, one called Virtuosity Solutions, which is a consultancy, and my primary company is called Studio Lightship. James works with us, and with my partner Josh Shore, and we are involved with creating our own indigenous IP around a hybrid approach to what we call VX, virtual experience writ large, which is VR, AR, MR, all of the above, in whatever way that you can get it to as large an audience as possible, which is a shifting, moving target at this point. I very much amplify what Tom said, that we need to create much more compelling content in this new mediums in order to create a mass market effect around it. We've been stuck in what I've been calling the demo ghetto of this medium for quite a while now, and we are going to need to create and bring together a much more multidisciplinary hybrid approach, I believe, to creating IP that really breaks out in the entire VX area writ large.
Okay. Shall we ask questions, or should somebody would like to talk? Give a little more?
Why don't you ask a question, James?
I'll ask a question. I have questions. Controlling for price for a second, just put that aside. Is there a consensus here for why VR sales were behind for 2016 and may very well be behind for 2017?
I'll take that one, because we've been wrestling with that a lot. Clearly, the biggest barrier to entry over the last year and a half has been the cost of high-end gaming PCs and the higher-end hardware that offers the better experience that is more similar to what people really hope VR will be. And because the price point was so high, it became something where lots of people who are interested in VR were at most getting an experience on cardboard, or were searching for it but not really finding it. And in this country, we didn't do a lot of VR arcades the way that China did. and some other markets. So just having access to the higher end equipment, I think will promote greater interest in VR. But because the barrier to entry was so high initially, it made it really tough. And yesterday, Google announced their Go headset, which is at $200, price pointed quite well, but it's essentially the same as a mobile VR experience. It's just built all in one. And so we've had Sky VR at around the same price point out for well over a year, but it didn't change the adoption rate as much as we all hoped it might. So now I think we're waiting to see inside-out tracking, a few other features that resemble high-end VR experiences trickling down, and as that happens, hopefully we'll start to see more of a mass adoption.
A nightmare scenario is as what if they gave a war and nobody came? What if they give a technology and nobody comes?
Yeah, I mean, I'll take the other side of what Philip is saying, which is, one of the big problems in reference to your question is the fact that a lot of money, billions of dollars, went into the tech pretty much only. And you can't have a medium without content that's compelling for that medium. And this seems to be a blind spot that continues to this day for the funding sources that have been funding this entire sort of VR hype bubble that we've been in. And I've seen a few hype bubbles before this in VR, though some of us have been involved since the 90s have. And it's still the same thing. Everyone seems to think that the content is going to fall like rain from heaven without actually seeding it with significant funding. And I mean significant funding. You can't do compelling, innovative content in a new emerging medium that's this technologically advanced and sophisticated and challenging at the budgets of 1980s corporate videos. And that is literally the reality that's been out there in this marketplace. Someone has to come in. I mean, I've had these meetings at Sony at very high-end places because I've been consulting around the industry and other industries as well. And without someone really coming in and doing that, and so one of the things we're working on at my company is finding the sources for that from unique and even strange sources. And I'll talk about that a little bit later. But I think that's one of the critical issues. There is no there for the actual thing this medium is supposed to be. Now, there are exceptions. What Kevin is doing, which I suggest everyone here experience, is an extremely unique and organic form of virtual experience that is endemic to the medium. That's very rare. Very
so you're
rare.
talking about a lot of the content and the art and the
Yes.
story side of what people would want to see. And then the other side of it, I think, is the needful things. When we see VR as a computing platform as much as a milieu for storytelling, then it opens the question of what are these necessary things that people will see and use VR for and go, oh, I have to have that. And then the desirability is driven by need as much as want.
Yeah, there's another problem though, because when you have a thing that's so new, I can't believe still everybody, the people in VR, the people who've been in it for since this latest boom, Google, Oculus, etc., they still don't understand what VR is. They don't understand its potential, and they have they're perpetrating a lot of misinformation about it. And so but in a sense, it's in their, maybe it's all clever and in their own interest because they're pushing it as it's a gaming platform. It's an extension of existing media. It's a new form of movie. It's a new form of storytelling. And I assure you that it's not a game medium or a storytelling medium. It's a reality medium. It's a completely new communication medium. And the problem with that is, with all of the way business works now and marketing and selling stuff, you have to have a thing that people know what it is. How do you sell a thing that people have never heard of? They can't conceive of it without having seen it. So it makes it very difficult. So it kind of makes sense. Like, you got to sell VR as like, oh, this is an extension. This is a new way of looking at movies, or this is a new way of playing video games, because that's something people go, oh, okay. And then it's like, hey, get the Star Wars VR, get the, some brand thing they can identify with. And it makes it really challenging, because that is at odds with the development and the success of the medium, because it's essentially throwing away the value of this new medium to just use it as an extension of these existing mediums.
To support that, I often play in a VR experience called The Wave, which is a rave platform, like a place to go see live music or DJ'd music online. And one of the things they have integrated really seamlessly is social VR, where people can talk to each other and have a verbal conversation with an avatar standing next to you seamlessly, and teleport by somebody and overhear what they're talking about. And I had an experience there one day where I was 10:30 at night in LA. I'm talking to a woman, and she's whispering at me. And I said, "Why are you whispering? We're in VR." She says, no, you don't understand. It's 4 a.m. in Tokyo. I don't want to wake my roommate. And I had this realization that I was, hanging out with people all over the world. And as we start to see more integration of social in various VR platforms, it didn't matter that we were there to watch music. It mattered that we were able to communicate. Yeah. And so, as exactly what you're saying, Kevin, as a tool and as a totally different sort of platform, it will enable people to do things that we already do in new ways, and I think that might help with adoption.
Well, and it'll help us to do things that we've never even conceived of, that that are completely new. And that's what's spooky to me, is that our whole culture, everything, the whole entertainment industry is at this stagnation point. We have all this innovation in technology, and yet we're watching, the Flintstones 98 and Star Wars 136, because there are no new ideas in entertainment. I just, or the few that there are never receive any funding or marketing, or nobody hears about them because they're not backed by the
financial markets have helped this, right? By confusing us. They keep touting that, not enough sales at the end of the year, which they'll do again in the next month or two.
Well, that begs the question, is VR a mass market medium?
I was just about to say,
because
they're moving us towards AR. They're
Yeah.
pushing as hard as they
Yeah.
possibly can, from a financial point of view
Yeah.
and from a technology point of view. So your question is exactly right.
Yeah, because you look at the IMAX, what they're trying to do with the theaters, and how many headsets do they have in that particular retail space, and how much does that retail space cost, as opposed to a full theater where you can sit 200 or 300 people and get a whole large audience in there, as opposed to a very expensive investment, because it's not cheap building all those workstations and headsets and stuff like that. And then the content for 5 minutes cost of good content. I mean, we've worked on projects that are $3 million budgets for 5 minutes. How much can you charge for that? Are you going to charge somebody $40 to watch a 5-minute experience?
No.
I don't think so.
And if it's not interactive, Brett builds these story worlds, and when I think about what people expect out of a VR experience, can you have a 360 experience or a 180 experience in a theater? You could seat enough people and bodies in there, but is the experience rich enough to justify the cost, or as satisfying as a movie experience? It seems like more of the goodies in VR happen when it becomes interactive and immersive and room scale.
Well, that's one of the trends we're seeing, because we started out doing just 360 stereo video, like Clouds Over Sidra and stuff like that. And now everybody's kind of really moving away from the 360 video, and they want that 6 DOF, that 6 degrees of freedom. They want interactivity. So now we're in this kind of place where the technology isn't really good enough to do it right, because they want to do performance capture and depth capture and live people, but the game engines on like cell phones aren't going to really handle that all that well,
The hardware is a huge factor involved with this, and unfortunately, again, you had a large group of people work to drill down what they thought the hardware should be, and there's a lot of readily available technology that's out there. But the problem that you have with AR and VR is you're tracking a bunch of different types of information in real time, and really what needs to happen is the processing needs to be reconfigurable on the fly. And until that happens, we're not going to have content that will actually be fully immersive. Because a VR experience, or just for example, imagine you're out in the courtyard there outside, and you're holding up your phone, or you have some kind of headset on, and you're watching a scene and there's bombs dropping and things are exploding, and then you turn to somebody next to you and overlaid on their face is somebody else's face, kind of like what we saw with Sean Young in the new Blade Runner. That's completely different types of processing that's going on. The geometry that is being calculated is massively different. Right now, they're trying to fit a square peg into a round hole. And until we get that constantly reconfigurable hardware into the headsets, everybody's going to have to be buying different headsets, different hardware, different types of technology, and it's just a very expensive economic endeavor. And then from a content creation side, again, like 35,000 years ago, we had people drawing pigs in caves, and now we're creating three-dimensional content that looks nearly as good as we are as humans. But the problem is it's super simple to draw art in a cave using some chalk or some kind of paint medium that you can spread across a wall like that. But to develop the content is also still very difficult.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things I've been looking at, about 6 months ago, I tweeted the director of Lommmerman says, "Fuck VR," and the reason I did that because I don't think it's about VR. I mean, in fact, the fact that that term as translated all the way from my movie on is sort of a funny, strange, ironic thing to me, because I think the thing that's coming at us like a huge tsunami is this idea of VX, virtual experience, that humans are going to be interfacing with artificial or simulated worlds in many, many different ways. And those of us that are ideating around this have to think about it in that larger context, not in the context of headset adoption. As long as you tie this content to headset adoption, we are putting the cart before the horse by 1,000 miles. It's really, really a misnomer that's been driving the industry, because why? The money went to the headset devices. It went to gadgets and the gadgets that support those things without defining what the hell is the human behavioral aspect of interfacing with a virtual simulated world. There are a lot of different thoughts on that. Kevin expresses his in a very, very cogent way. I think there are ways of not storytelling in this medium, but what I call story worlding, which is putting people into a world that is designed from the world assets on up. And that's one of the things we're looking at, as opposed to just trying to put them into a fully immersive space. But think about how to use all the media platforms in order to create this hybrid approach to virtual experience. Putting social at the core of it is, as Philip, you were saying, is absolutely essential, because this is essentially a communication medium. It's essentially something about humans connecting with other humans. That's a primal need, and so that's the primal need that this medium, or mediums, however you want to configure it, needs to address at its core, whether it's an entertainment process. One of the things that we're working with is not just entertainment projects, but projects like medical visualization and the visualization of a new transportation system. These are the kinds of things that are really pushing and stretching us and thinking about how virtual experience can be delivered in a way that humans will go, yeah, we need it for that. Because them needing it for a new entertainment experience, to put a headset on and look at a 360 video, it's never going to be compelling enough. I've been one of the people saying that for many, many years now. Now suddenly the market is sort of hitting the reality of that.
You know, it's like Brett said to me really early on, years ago. He started talking about, the need for VEVR, the need for very expensive virtual reality. Somebody has to go out and make this stuff really well. And on the other side of the equation, it's much like James was saying, where there's very expensive endeavors, whether they're hardware or content, but they're limited. And then there's very low-end stuff where people are trying their best as a creative community to make cool stuff, to make stuff people are going to like. And so the tool sets that have to be created, they take time. And you know, when I'm working in photogrammetry, my partner at Reality Virtual, Simon Shea DeBoer, is one of those guys who's out there trying to use Kinect cameras and DSLRs and things that are cheap and accessible to be able to generate worlds that are so realistic and so beautiful that they compel people to want to spend time in them. And that has to exist on a certain level before we can populate those worlds with characters and stories and
Exactly. And one of the problems is that that stuff is changing so rapidly. We are on a shifting tech stack that is shifting constantly right now. So we can't codify that. We have to create a process that floats like surface tension on the top of that shifting tech stack and think more about the human behavioral aspects. Because I use the beginning of cinema as an example. The beginning of cinema became a mass market medium using very rudimentary tools, because there was cleverness brought to the medium. There was emotion brought to the medium. There was things that used the limitations of the medium as a feature, not a problem. And I've seen very little of that done in this medium, I think because it initially, the oxygen, the money went to the tech side. And then a lot of the people in the tech side thought, this is our medium and we're going to tell our stories in it. And we've gotten things like Oculus Story Studio and things like that, which now no longer exist, because there was a misnomer about the people you need at the table. This, I believe, has a multidisciplinary aspect that is different than anything else we've ever experienced as a medium, and that's one of the issues.
The tech people seem to think, and the business people as well, that you need real innovation in the hardware, but when it comes to the content, we want the tried and true thing that's been successful for 40 years. We don't want anything new or innovative. They want Star Wars. They want the same stuff that they've relied on. They want to make video games. They want to make movies. It's just the way they understand it, and it's not that kind of a medium.
To defend the industry a little here, when I went out to find every possible number I could find on the internet about VR humans and VR targets, all that exists is games. You could start your business with games, you can end your business with games. There's enough money out there in games. It's very hard, I think, for an emerging technology to turn down or to step away from
absolutely
clear numbers, clear, solid
numbers.
No,
I absolutely agree. I see the reasoning behind it. It's like I said, how do you sell a thing if you can't even tie it to something that we understand? And so that's the problem. And so, maybe you could all help me just get my thing out there. You could get those people to spend the money on my VR art experience that alters consciousness in positive ways, and then if we could get each and every person in the world to try it, then it would be all done. Everybody'd know, and then we could market lots of other cool stuff.
All you need is China.
The thing is that there's a large
Studio City.
There's a larger philosophic thing here that the business paradigm or rubric of the past, when emerging technologies and emerging mediums erupted, was completely different than the capitalistic system we're in now, which has shifted and changed into something that is so based on something that's already been. I mean, the entire motion picture business is based on only what has existed as IP that can be trackable as something that will work now. And that has, I believe, contracted the art and the entire medium of cinema in a way. So we're starting from that kind of basis of thought in trying to create a new medium that we want to say is inherently a new organic experience. And humans do have a need for new organic experiences, but they're not marketed that way. It's a misnomer. It's a disconnect in the way the system works, in the way that I believe there is actually a market need out there, but it's very difficult to connect those dots.
It's sort of the same as it ever was, in the sense that painters have always complained that their backers didn't understand them.
Of course.
And it goes back to Greece and probably to China, but I don't know. So part of me says, okay, given the fact that all the money is sitting either in technology on one side or backing games on the other, what's the bridging technology here? You and I, Brett, have spoken about real-time rendering as as an alternative or as a possibility, because the faster we can render and the more we can miniaturize it, the faster we're going to get to the screens that matter, which is to say mobile
Well,
screens.
we have a bit of a problem though in that.
Yeah.
Moore's law has pretty much run its course.
But there's a way around that. Field programmable gate arrays are a type of processor, like I was mentioning earlier, that are reconfigurable. And if you're able to take, so effectively a CPU would be like a house where all the walls are built and they're set there for eternity. And you can walk through the house just like electrons shoot through the CPU, and you're able to do certain types of processing, but you are limited to the construct of where those walls are. A field programmable gate array is like a house where you can reconfigure the walls at any given time depending on what your needs are. So if you have a 2-story house and you're going to have a party and you want all the walls removed from the bottom of the house, you can do that and make the room smaller up on the top level. You can do a bunch of different things that way, and until we start seeing FPGAs inside of these devices, we're going to be ultra limited. The economics aren't going to work. You're going to be stuck in a situation where your content has to match your device, and you're going to be stuck in an issue where the software that is producing these experiences are also going to be limited by what the hardware can do. Where if the hardware can reconfigure itself using some kind of artificial intelligence, you can take this to a completely different level. And like they're saying, where Moore's law, which is basically how small and how fast we can get a processor, has run its course, we need to approach this utilizing different methodologies. And finally, there are companies like Xilinx and with Intel doing their current acquisitions. They're pushing field programmable gate arrays out into the world. But right now, until we see that in virtual or augmented reality hardware, we're not going to be able to get the full experience.
What do you think is holding up the FPGAs? Because about 20 years ago, I was meeting with some guys that had built a supercomputer that uses FPGAs, and it was going to be just, you know, petaflops, just crazy speeds and everything. And they couldn't ever really get an operating system that would work.
There's been a bunch of things. The reconfiguration has been an issue, and so we've seen just recently Xilinx is a manufacturer of these types of processors, and they've paired the ARM type of processor like all of you have in your phones together with these reconfigurable processors, and now you can run an operating system at the operating system level that can reconfigure the hardware in real time. And I think where that, until those two things converged, we basically had an amazing tool that could be used in a bunch of different ways, but it just wasn't practical. The other problem with it is the syntax that's necessary to write the code for field programmable gate arrays is unbelievably difficult. Anything that you could take 10 minutes and write in Java might take you 2 days in VHDL or Verilog or one of the other proprietary languages. It's very difficult. So you need effectively our current set of operating systems to be able to have the interfacing that we are used to, and then another operating system that or some level of the operating system that can control the FPGA, reconfigure it without the need of having that kind of programmatic interaction.
How long do you think it is before I have that in my house and I'm using it to develop VR?
I think we're still a couple years away. I got to tell you, like out of all the people that I work with and interface with on the engineering level, I don't have a single other person that is working in the commercial area that is using field programmable gate arrays. Now, in the academic area, I have quite a few people who are using them. So there's got to be that jump. And don't get me wrong, there are plenty of corporations out there that are using FPGAs to speed up your content to your app on your phone, and that's cool and that's great, but for this purpose, there's got to be that jump out of the academia to the commercial landscape, and people need to know that these tools exist. I think the biggest problem is people don't even know that this technology exists, and what they don't realize is that when NVIDIA is sitting there modeling their microchips, they're using these FPGAs to come up with the definition of how the circuitry is going to work in their graphics cards. And so why go from something that's software defined and reconfigurable to something that's hard defined and not reconfigurable when you could just eliminate the hard side and just implement the soft side?
Why don't they do that?
Well, the price of field programmable gate arrays had to come way down. The other issue that existed for a long time with them was the ability to rewrite more than a certain amount of times. Like initially, the field programmable gate arrays, you could do like 20 or 30 cycles on them, you know, and then they've gotten up to 10,000 cycles, and they've gotten to a point where I think they might not cap out. I don't know. I'm not architect of that kind of stuff, but there was a lot of facets that needed to be overcome. But if you think about it, like everybody in here has their phone. Everybody's phone has multiple processors that process for different types of things that are very specialized. And this technology basically is like a kitchen with 1 million ingredients in it. You can sit and you could cook anything with those 1 million ingredients, and it's one single kitchen. You don't need a kitchen that's set up to cook Thai food and a kitchen that's set up to cook Indian food and one for German food. You would be able to have it all in one place.
It's like a programming language in hardware.
Yeah.
So it puts things on the software foundation, and you know there are things going on out there. I don't know how many of you are aware of a company called Improbable, which got $500 million from SoftBank. It's a company we've been communicating with on a number of levels because they have, I think, the kind of software that's going to be fully expressed in this kind of hardware configuration, and it allows almost infinite multi-participant activity within an algorithmic world that is representing a virtual world to an extremely detailed degree. It's very, and look, for me, I come at it this as a storyteller, or now a story worlder, and a sort of from a mythopoetic standpoint. It just thrills me when I hear someone like you talk about these brilliant things that you're doing, because I always feel this stuff's coming. What we have to do is be ready for it. It's like we have to think this way about virtual experience, not be by the limited forms that it's now currently in, because I believe we're in a 3 to 5 year maturation process for this medium in general to really start to gain traction. And that's going to be, you know, several years of real pain is coming up here, where those of us that are true believers are going to have to really keep the flame going, because it's going to feel like that market is just not establishing itself, and it you know, there's going to be, I think, some things that are going to help it along. I think medical use of VR is really showing a tremendous amount of advancement that has real efficacy. And so there's going to be these things that humans will say, we need it for that, for real. Those things are always all going to inform what we do in this larger sort of holy grail vision of multi-participant interactive narrative story worlds, which would involve experiences like what Kevin is making, along with the idea of a world you'd interact in with characters and emotion. And you know, that's the holy grail, but it's something I believe is coming, but we have to look at it in an iterative process and think about the human behavioral aspects of this, so that when that hardware and software platform is there that can actually execute it, we're ready as creators. And essentially, we fake it till we make it.
I'm ready. I'm ready. I got some. I'm using you know, some cool artificial life and rule-based systems. I got these things, and they're not remotely human, but I think they might be sentient, and they you can interact with them, and they're going to be able to heal you. They'll be able to fix things.
Absolutely.
Boy,
you know, I think we are on the precipice of this. What we are experiencing, as far as I gather this, is at some point somebody came up with a round stone, and it took maybe thousands of years for somebody to look at that round stone and said, if we put a hole through this and put one on the other side, we got a cart. Right. And we are somewhere in the midst of that happening, with necessity being the mother of all invention. We are finding these needs. It could be, you know, for mental health, being able to create an artificially intelligent friend that you can talk to that might have prevented what happened in Las Vegas. Somebody to express their emotions to that was confidential, a way that you could express certain things without the repercussions that you might experience socially. Like, there's a million opportunities for virtual and augmented or any kind of mixed reality. The tool base, I think, is a huge limitation until companies like Autodesk start making programs for creating 3D content much easier, even with what they've done with what's available on iPads. It's amazing. It's unbelievable. Like, to be able to use your finger and draw 3D models in the same way that 20 years ago it would have taken you hundreds of hours to create that same model and to get the rendering level there. The problem is there's no jump between that and the interactivity. So the software that defines that interaction, I think, is that missing link. That is the hole through the round stone that creates the wheel. As soon as we can traverse that gap, we will see an unbelievable explosion in how people are utilizing these technologies.
Totally agree.
The context that Brett has not told you is that he has a view about what happens to apps in the real world. This is if that's the technical side,
Yeah.
the app is the delivery mechanism.
Yeah.
I actually beg to differ on, I think the appification of the world was essential, but it is soon to be deprecated.
That's what I'm saying.
Okay, well,
We're agreeing.
yeah, so we are agreeing. The medium in which we access the technology needs to be significantly reduced. Like, the web is amazing. You can go on and experience people's web pages in all different ways. You can program it, and for the most part, with the exception of some incompatibilities, you can have the same experience that everybody has in a very generalized way. Once we get a means to deliver this kind of content through a browser and be able to drop in a video feed from outside and be able to interact with that in a logical manner, whether the video feed is being displayed in the world that you're experiencing or it is just being used for measurement purposes, that will be where we traverse that gap.
Yeah.
So I think we're seeing the infancy of that starting to happen with web VR.
With web VR, I was gonna say.
Yeah, you got to give a shout out to
Yeah.
the folks, whether it's Tony Parisi over at Unity, who's one of the godfathers of the space, or guys like James McRae and the crew out of Canada who have pushed Janus VR as an engine. There's all of these attempts at taking a 3D navigable world and reducing it to a flat screen.
Yeah.
And to reduce barriers of entry and friction, both in building and experiencing this content, that's an essential step on the road. And when I look at if I may just, the kind of technology that you're talking about, the FPGAs and some of these other soon-to-come forms of technology that will increase the quality of the experiences across all the platforms we want to play it on, those things can't be overlooked. But at the same time, what's getting swept under the rug a little bit is just how remarkable the results are with the toys that we do have and the tools that we've got right now. When you're able to elicit physiological reactions, when you're able to induce things like PTSD, which is not desirable, but can accidentally occur.
And you can
we're
reduce
past a
PTSD.
certain threshold.
And
to reduce PTSD, like Skip
Skip
Rizzo,
Rizzo's
those
work,
guys are doing, helping paralyzed people walk and.
I can't believe it. I set out. Virtual reality art has been my dream my whole life. I'm an artist. I want to make cool art. So when it was finally I could get a hold of the device and I could make something for it, I made a thing, and I was just trying to make a cool art thing, an abstract art experience. And I employ a bunch of tricks from neuroscience to make it psychoactive and affect people this way or that way. But they're subtle things. They're not changing people's lives with because it's a certain shape or something.
Well, it turns out in VR, your experience, it has the ability to profoundly relax.
Well,
people.
yeah, but that's the thing in VR.
Those
Subtle things suddenly have great power. And now, like my first piece, Zen Parade, my first experiment is being used during awake brain surgery as a hypnoanalgesic. And to help map the right hemisphere, they're saying it's more effective than the apps that were designed for pain relief, and that it's more effective than opiates.
There's just a recent article about pain relief. My brother Greg and I were just talking about it yesterday, that they're showing tremendous pain relief for people that are getting debrided, who have had profound burns. They put them in a environment where they're making snowballs and throwing snowballs, and literally takes them out of the pain experience of debriding.
And that's one of the ones that they're saying
That's
that my art thing is far more effective, because that's only using distraction as a modality, distraction therapy,
I don't want to
and
interrupt,
I'm using
but
a bunch of other
I want
ones.
to interrupt.
Yeah.
To see if we can take some questions, because that gentleman over there has been very patient.
So I've been to a lot of the conversations in the last 3 days, and you guys have really brought it to a focus. I'm hearing
That's our job.
two conflicting chicken and egg situations. You've got the hardware and the content. We can't get great hardware sales until we've got great content that compels everyone. And the other one is the tool set. We don't have great creator tools, but we also don't have the language. You know, we're still waiting for the E.W. Griffith
Yep.
to kind of show us how to tell stories, not just put the camera in the plane.
It's not telling stories.
Yeah, it's,
Right,
it's,
okay,
yeah.
so
Yeah.
I'm still using my language.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's all we have.
So
Yeah.
there are these two interlocked chicken and egg things. How do you, I mean, you're all working to break that. But what have you seen so far that you think is the biggest point of, yeah, this is the way that it should be going, or this is the most exciting thing? Maybe it's your own work, maybe it's other things you've seen.
I think it has to be driven by use case. So when I look at VR as a medium, it is inherently insulating. It blocks out the world around you and puts you in a space. And so for what I've been doing with giving people prayer and meditation tools and trying to carve out time in people's daily lives to be more spiritual, to be more plugged into things that are hard. And I have a lot of people come up to me afterwards and say that, you know, I want to meditate. I believe meditation is good. It's very hard for me to quiet my mind. It's very hard for me to, you know, not engage in all these other things. But when you're in VR, there's enough visual stimulation. Of course, I wish it was higher fidelity, but there's enough. There's enough spatial audio and enough ability for people to engage just so much as a distraction that it lets you reach an altered state.
And there's so much more, so many more possibilities. The distraction is very powerful. It's effective. There's no question. But there are all these other things that VR enables of brainwave entrainment, of you know, stimulating the parasympathetic nervous system through awe. You can inspire awe through VR, and that's hard to do. It's not, you know, movies don't do it, or very rarely do it, and only for a moment, and it doesn't last. But in VR, I've discovered it's possible to actually create an awe feedback. Like, you can get people into a feedback loop in awe.
Predictably.
Predictably.
And that's the catch, right? A movie, a TV show might give you this moment if you're ready to hear it and you feel it, and it lines up magically, and that's part of what's beautiful about those experiences. But in VR, we can predictably, repeatedly induce states in our users, and that's very powerful.
Which goes back to the beginning of this for me, which is telling a cautionary tale about VR, because the medium, this is extremely powerful, and it's going to become exponentially more powerful, I believe, very rapidly. Within, you know, when I'm talking about within 3 to 5 years, that's really fast for something to happen. And I think it's going to be something that happens on a ubiquitous level that will be incredibly powerful and will change the nature of things, just the way that social media has changed the nature of representative democracy and the news in a way that now has put us in a very, very interesting situation in the world. This, I believe, has even higher stakes than that.
I would like to add something really quickly to this. I think that our biggest limitation right now with VR and AR and our experience is the fact that we have to put a headset on. The second that we can jump from that to actual holography, and people are working on this right now with things called femtosecond lasers, they're capable of projecting images in three-dimensional space in front of you. So if you guys saw the movie Her, and Joaquin Phoenix is sitting there playing the video games, that is the very edge. We are right now just beginning to be able to produce this type of technology, and once that hits scale, all of this makes sense.
Exactly. Anyone else? Questions? Sir.
So, at the present moment, what tools exist that a low-budget creator can use to create content in this space, or do those tools just not exist right now?
No, they do, and I, you know, I agree with Brett's notion that we need high-budget VR. Like, I could sure use some help, but I'm making my VR. I make it by myself. I don't have any help. Well, I have a little help every once in a while. I can get a buddy. I'll call somebody who'll help me with a little thing I can't figure out. But I'm just one guy making VR, and the tools are there, and they've been there for many years. And it's essentially virtual reality is computer graphics. Now, if you want to do all this cool stuff, if you want to work with real actors and real people in the real world, then you're limited to either 360 video or you're into the big dollar, cutting edge research stuff of the videogrammetry and photogrammetry, and that's really hard. That's why I just figure, well, I'm just going to do computer graphics, because I can create entirely new worlds and in vast detail. Procedurally, I can create artificial life. I can do all these different things, but I can't make people. I could, but it's a huge amount of work. It just costs a fortune. So, and you need an army of people working on those kinds of things.
On the 360 video side, there's tools that are out there. The problem is, because we do tons of that type of work, and I got a project right now that was shot on a very high-end camera and all this stuff. I've probably spent 2/3 of my time fixing the technical limitations of the acquisition systems. And that's pretty much our business has been based on fixing what's bad design of the systems or shooting it bad. So there is a balance there. If you get a right configuration of a camera system, you then have to know how to shoot it and use it to get the right effect and the right emotional experience you want. But you also know how to point the camera so you take away all the errors and the problems you have to fix, trying to finish it.
Yeah, I think,
So they're kind of there. You can do some pretty good work, but there's a lot of technique that you really have to learn and really have to understand in order to do it, to present quality, high quality.
I'd like to see some machine learning overlaid on that, where you could take an RFID tag, slap it on one of the crew people, and they get immediately eliminated from the scenes.
Yeah.
Well, we're starting to see a little bit. There's a guy here in town, Philippe Lewicki, who has a company called After Now, who's just put out an AR app that's for blocking. And so we're just starting to see the advent of simple tools that are inexpensive, that take advantage of the technology we're all talking about, and enable creative producers like ourselves to be able to make stuff easier with a lower barrier to entry and less friction. But to really have the good stuff out of VR, you've got to have these guys' sort of expertise, where they've got a deep career in the space and know how to use these tools.
The problem with most of the new tools that have been introduced, not Philips technology at all, I'm not talking about that, but the ones that say, oh, we're going to auto stitch for you and all that stuff, they don't work. I'm sorry, they just don't work.
Except for Live Planet. That works perfectly.
Well, if you're shooting a wide angle shot where there's nothing close up, people aren't crossing seams, you don't have people going like this, they work fine. But who shoots that? Nobody shoots anything like that, and especially if you want it in stereo now. So that's a whole other story.
Or you can just get
tools just don't work.
Unity or Unreal Engine and just leave the real world behind.
Yeah, or, just because 360 video is sort of on a downtrend right now, I think it still hasn't been played with enough, because it's a tremendous opportunity to just stage in a spherical environment. Just thinking that way is a huge thing you can do for not a lot of money with a gear camera. You can do it.
No, don't even use a gear camera. Just get a DSLR and shoot in quadrants.
Yeah.
Do a nodal thing with shoot in quadrants. Be smart and clever about it, and you can do it with the stuff.
There's been too much focus on the technology and not enough on just what has happened in abstract experimental theater for the past 100 years. Just taking those things and applying them to that medium.
I want to take the last question, and then management has asked us to run out of here and talk in the hallway, because they have another group coming right in on top of us. Sir.
Brett, you and I may be new tools, only people in here are old enough to remember Mist.
I do remember. Well, many of us do. Yeah, Mist was amazing. Yeah.
Did you look great?
And there's a bunch of mini Mists after that, but it didn't change the medium. I've seen some remarkable verticals on VR. Medical,
Yeah.
military using it for dangerous stuff you can't replicate, like taking bombs apart. There's
Yeah.
remarkable verticals. Do you guys think we're actually going to see a broad-based consumer market for the technology in the next 5, 6, 7 years?
I think within that time,
about
we are
that?
going to, but we're in a maturation process right now. We're in the pain part of the curve, and we'll be there for several years, I think.
I mean, I think you are seeing some technologies, simple, the basic stuff like higher resolution screens. You know, LG announced their new screen technology that takes away the, the pixelization of this, and Samsung's got 11K screens in development, stuff like that. For the average consumer, that's a simple upgrade that totally can transform the experience. Say, oh, wow, it doesn't look like I'm looking through a wire screen anymore. So, and that's just around the corner.
Even companies like Improbable, as I understand it, they're using the technology for real high-end multiplayer gaming.
Right now, that's one of the things. They also have the military as a client in, the City of London, the City of New York, because they do civic design.
We tend to follow the analogy we know, and in VR, we don't know the analogy yet as to what's entertainment festival.
Exactly.
Okay, I've got to ask everybody just to move it out into the hall.